In the far reaches of the galaxy, beyond the known lanes of travel and diplomacy, there lay a region few dared to enter, the Rimward Vale. It was there, in the silent vastness, that the Zalari Dominion, a powerful and deeply respected alien empire, had sent one of its largest exploration fleets to study a mysterious wormhole recently discovered by long-range probes. Composed of science vessels, engineering crafts, and support ships, the fleet entered the wormhole expecting a quick survey mission, but within moments of crossing the event horizon, something went terribly wrong. A cosmic storm, the kind not seen in 1,000 cycles, surged through the wormhole, striking with unimaginable force. Shields collapsed under the pressure, power grids surged, and massive bursts of electromagnetic energy fried communication systems. The Zalari fleet, so proud of its flawless order and precision, became a cluster of broken, drifting ships. With life support failing and their navigational systems scattered, the fleet was left helpless, floating in a dead zone of space with no way to call for help through their official channels. To make matters worse, the Zalari, known across the stars for their pride and isolationist stance, refused to activate their high-priority distress protocols. Instead, they chose a quieter option, a low-frequency emergency signal, weak and nearly impossible to detect beyond their immediate range. It was a silent plea, hidden in shame, and they expected it would echo unanswered until their lights went dark. But hundreds of light years away, orbiting a quiet blue planet known to them only as a lesser world, a newly built deep space exploration vessel, the UNSS Dauntless, was preparing for its maiden voyage. Inside its command center, among the humming consoles and crisp uniforms, sat Lieutenant Mira Jordan, a young and curious communications officer known for her habit of listening to the static between stars. On a late-night rotation, while the crew completed departure protocols, Mira's console began to twitch with a pattern that didn't match any known signal. It was faint, nearly lost in the cosmic background, but it pulsed like a whisper trying to break through the noise. Her training told her to dismiss it. Deep space was full of strange sounds, but something about this one felt intentional. She isolated the signal, cleaned the noise, and began decoding fragments. What she found didn't match any known human transmission. Her heart raced. This wasn't just an anomaly, it was a distress signal, alien and urgent. Without waiting for orders, she ran it through every linguistic database, and though incomplete, it clearly repeated a simple message: assistance required, no aggression, life support failing. She immediately contacted the bridge. Captain Jonas, Reeve, a calm and experienced leader, listened carefully. He had served on diplomatic missions before, and he knew Mira wasn't prone to false alarms. Still, flying to an uncharted section of space on the eve of a new mission was a risk. Protocol required authorization. But as Mira showed him the signal, her voice steady but urgent, he saw something more than just numbers and static. There was desperation in the message, a call from someone who didn't expect to be heard. Reeve looked out through the viewing bay toward the stars and made a choice. "Plot a course," he ordered. "Let's see who needs help." As the Dauntless changed its heading, questions spread across the ship like ripples in a pond. Who could have sent the signal? Why was it so weak? And what would they find at the other end of this strange trail? Mira returned to her console, heart pounding with a mix of excitement and unease. She couldn't shake the feeling that this signal wasn't just a cry for help. It was the beginning of something much bigger, something no one on Earth had expected. The Rimward Vale was silent once more, but not for long. Humanity was on its way. The Dauntless dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a soft hum that echoed through the ship's frame, the stars before them stretching back into focus as the Rimward Vale appeared in full view. But what awaited them was far beyond anything the crew had expected. Suspended in the cold silence of space were nearly 40 massive vessels, ships of alien design, dark and elegant, drifting like shattered monuments. Their hulls were scarred, sections torn open by unseen forces, and flickers of fading energy bled from broken systems. Some rotated slowly, lifeless, while others flickered with weak internal lights. It was the Zalari fleet, just as the signal had warned. Powerful and proud ships now helpless, scattered like toys across a broken starfield. A hush fell over the Dauntless as scans confirmed the worst. Power levels were near zero, environmental systems were barely holding, and hundreds, perhaps thousands of life forms remained aboard, clinging to survival in oxygen-depleted, freezing compartments. Captain Jonas Reeve gave the order to proceed cautiously. No one knew how the Zalari would react, and first contact, especially during a crisis, was always unpredictable. As they approached the lead ship, a transmission burst through their systems, sharp and clipped, spoken in a language no one recognized at first. It was a warning, filled with suspicion and tension. The voice belonged to Commander Vornax Tekel, leader of the stranded fleet. His tone was rigid, defensive, and yet beneath it lay a note of desperation. The Zalari had not expected anyone to answer their call, least of all a species they considered primitive by comparison. Initial communications were slow, filled with static and pauses as translation systems struggled to bridge the cultural and linguistic gap. Mira Jordan, already familiar with fragments of the original distress signal, worked side by side with the ship's AI to build a real-time translator. She soon found herself speaking directly to Selnek Vera, a Zalari linguist and one of the few willing to attempt meaningful dialogue. The first exchanges were tense. The Zalari couldn't understand why the humans were there, and even more, they couldn't believe that the humans had come not to conquer, demand tribute, or claim salvage, but simply to help. Vornax, battle-scarred and burdened with the responsibility of his failing fleet, questioned every offer. "What do your people want in return?" he asked more than once. But the humans kept giving the same answer. Nothing. Within hours, shuttles from the Dauntless moved between the crippled ships ferrying supplies, oxygen tanks, food rations, water purifiers, and portable atmospheric processors. Teams of engineers, dressed in reinforced suits and guided by Mira's translations, entered darkened corridors filled with dying systems and flickering lights. They crawled through maintenance ducts, bypassed damaged circuits, and reignited engines that had not hummed in days. What startled the Zalari most was not the humans' skill but their dedication. When one reactor began to overheat, a young human engineer stayed behind to stabilize it, despite the risk. He succeeded, and though his arm was badly burned, he waved off concern with a grin. "Just doing my job," he said. On the Zalari command ship, Vornax watched this with silent confusion. The humans operated without fear, without ego. They asked for no reward. They worked long hours and offered kind words even when treated with suspicion. This selfless nature was alien to the Zalari, who had long viewed strength as dominance and viewed aid as a form of leverage. Yet here, drifting at the edge of the galaxy, the humans were rewriting every assumption. One by one, the walls of mistrust began to crack. When a human medic helped deliver a Zalari child aboard a failing life support pod, the entire ship stood in stunned silence. When Mira shared Earth literature with Selnek, simple stories about courage and kindness, the Zalari linguist grew quiet, realizing just how much humanity had to offer, not in weapons or ships, but in spirit. The Dauntless became a beacon, in the dark, a floating symbol of what humanity could be at its best. And though the repairs were far from over, something else had already begun to change. The Zalari had reached out to the stars expecting silence, perhaps death. What they found, instead, was hope, and the unexpected hand of a species they had once overlooked. Suspense still lingered in the air. This was just the beginning of something larger. But for the first time in days, the Zalari dared to believe they might survive. And more than that, they wondered if they had just met not rescuers, but equals. Dendara. Days that followed brought a quiet urgency aboard the Zalari fleet, as human and alien crews worked side by side in a delicate balance of caution and growing trust. Repairs were underway across multiple ships, with engineering teams from the Dauntless moving swiftly through damaged corridors, rewiring power systems and restoring life support modules that had come dangerously close to total failure. On board, the Zalari flagship, however, The stakes suddenly climbed to a critical level when a malfunction deep within the main reactor triggered a chain reaction that threatened to ignite a full core meltdown. Warning sirens screamed through the corridors and emergency bulkheads slammed shut, trapping a team of human engineers, led by Lieutenant Grayson Holt, inside the reactor maintenance chamber. With only minutes before the energy buildup reached an irreversible point, the team began rerouting coolant flow and manually overriding failing stabilizers. Every second counted. Sparks rained down from exposed conduits, the heat rising rapidly, yet none of the engineers paused. They knew what was at risk, not just their lives, but the lives of every soul aboard the Zalari command vessel. Sweat dripped from their brows, gloves melted onto metal panels, and oxygen alarms blinked red as the countdown neared disaster. At the last possible moment, Grayson jammed a bypass tool into the overloaded regulator and kicked the coolant system back online. A sudden rush of cold vapor filled the chamber, and the energy spike dropped instantly. The meltdown was stopped. Cheers erupted on both sides of the ship's intercom, even from Zalari officers who had only minutes earlier questioned the humans' competence. One life pod technician, a Zalari cadet, whispered in awe, "They risked everything for us." Meanwhile, in quieter sections of the flagship, Mira Jordan found herself spending more time with Selnek Vera, the Zalari linguist who had become the informal voice between their species. What began as translation work quickly grew into deep conversations, often late into the artificial night cycle. They exchanged stories of their worlds. Selnek spoke of Zalari history and their long belief in hierarchical strength, where only the most dominant ruled, and where compassion was often seen as a weakness. Mira, in turn, told tales of Earth's past and present, of moments in human history where unity had been forged not through conquest but through empathy, resilience, and cooperation. She shared images of human cities lit by stars, of teams working together to explore oceans and space, and of simple acts of kindness that had shaped nations. Selnek listened, his eyes narrowing not in doubt, but in reflection. These were not the stories he expected from a species once dismissed as young and naive. He began to see that while the Zalari had spent generations building empires of dominance, the humans had mastered something different, something that demanded a new kind of respect. Across the fleet, this shift was taking root. Where once the Zalari treated the humans with suspicion, they now began to greet them with cautious gratitude. Mechanics handed them tools without being asked. Officers offered quiet nods of approval in the corridors. Even Vornax Tikal, still stern and watchful, invited Captain Reeve to join a strategy session, not as an observer but as an equal. The captain accepted, and for the first time, both sides sat at the same table, planning the next stages of repair and evacuation if needed. It was a moment no one had predicted, and it left a mark on every person in the room. And yet beneath the surface, a sense of suspense lingered. This wasn't just about repairing ships or stabilizing energy cores. Something deeper was happening. An invisible line was being crossed, one that had stood between their two species for generations. The Zalari had always measured strength through control, power, and victory. But now, faced with humanity's calm courage, their willingness to sacrifice for strangers, and their ability to connect without dominance, the foundation of Zalari, belief was beginning to shift. It was not an easy change. Pride held firm, and doubt still clung to the edges of every interaction. But the seed had been planted. As the artificial sun began to rise on the Zalari flagship's internal systems, newly, repaired and shining for the first time in days, Selnek stood beside Mira and said softly, "Your people confuse us, Lieutenant, but you also give us something we have not known in a long time. Humility." Mira smiled, the light of the ship's reborn core glowing softly behind her. "Maybe that's what strength really is," she replied. And somewhere in the dark, reaches of space far from Earth or Zalari homeworlds, the idea took hold that humanity, despite its youth, despite its flaws, might not be just another species among many. They might be something more, something worth remembering. The alliance between the humans and the Zilari had begun to take root, built carefully through shared work, mutual respect, and acts of bravery in the darkest moments. With each system restored, each corridor lit once more, the distance between the two species seemed to shrink. But deep beneath the surface of this growing trust, danger waited in silence. Unseen by either side, an extremist within the Zilari fleet, Commander Zelvar Kren, a loyalist to an old and aggressive faction of the Dominion, watched the progress with cold eyes. He believed the Zilari had fallen too far, had grown too weak, and that allowing humans to assist them was a sign of decay. To him, these soft-spoken gestures of unity were not hope, but humiliation. And so, hidden within a darkened storage bay of the Zilari cruiser Varric's Flame, Kren set his plan in motion. He rigged a fake signal burst to mimic a weapons lock. From the dauntless faked security footage showing humans sneaking into Zilari systems, and finally triggered a small explosion near a docking port, timed perfectly to a dauntless supply run. Within moments, suspicion spread like wildfire. On board the Zilari flagship, panicked voices filled the command deck demanding answers. Officers who had only just started to accept human presence now recoiled in doubt. The explosion had harmed no one, but its symbolism struck hard. It appeared the humans had tried to breach one of the core memory banks. Vornax Tekel stood frozen, staring at the data Kren presented, and for the first time, uncertainty cracked through the calm he had fought to maintain. Aboard the Dauntless, Captain Reeve received the alert with grim focus. The docking teams were recalled immediately, and defensive shields were raised, not in aggression but to protect his crew from a situation spiraling out of control. He knew the accusations were false. No one on his crew had even approached the systems in question. But the problem was proving it before fear took over. Mira Jordan, stunned by the sudden change in tone from the Zilari command, turned to the only person she still trusted completely, Selnek Vera. He was confused, troubled by the evidence, but something about it didn't feel right. Together, they returned to the communications archives and dug through the logs, searching for inconsistencies. After hours of cross-checking signals and comparing timestamps, they found it, an anomaly in the sequence of command codes, something too precise to be a mistake. Mira matched it to the same encryption patterns used in Kren's earlier transmissions. It was a mask, a false trail, a planted set of data designed to mimic human systems. Someone was trying to start a war. Realizing time was against them, Mira and Selnek raced to the Zilari flagship. The docking bay was under tight control and tensions were dangerously high. Armed Zilari guards shadowed every movement. Mira walked ahead without fear, data slate in hand, knowing this was their only chance. Inside the command chamber, Vornax listened as they laid out the truth. Code fragments, forged footage, and transmission patterns, all pointed to the same individual. Mira finished with a quiet breath. You wanted to believe the worst in us, but that doesn't make it true. For a long moment, silence reigned. Then Vornax turned to his security chief. Bring Commander Kren to the chamber, now. When Kren arrived, flanked by guards, his expression was calm, but his eyes were sharp. He made no excuses, no denials. We do not need these allies, he said coldly. They will weaken us further. I did what was necessary to wake us up. Vornax, once his superior in rank, now looked at him as something far smaller. You nearly destroyed everything we had left. The guards took Kren into custody, and the weight of his actions settled over the room like a storm finally breaking. But the humans had not fired back, not even when the fleet raised its shields. They had not abandoned the Zilari, nor made threats. They had chosen restraint, even when accused, and that choice, so unexpected by Zilari standards, cut through years of prejudice. Vornax stood before Mira and Captain Reeve, his voice steady. Your people had every reason to leave, but you stayed, not out of duty or fear, but because it was right. I misjudged you. Reeve offered a quiet nod, his face unreadable but his tone calm. It's not always easy doing the right thing, but we do it anyway. The crisis had passed, but the scars it left were deep. The fleet remained cautious, but a wall had fallen that would never rise again. For the first time in generations, Zalari leaders looked at humanity not as inferiors or threats, but as allies. As the stars beyond the rimward veil burned cold and clear, both species stood on the edge of something new. Suspense still hung in the air, for the future remained unwritten. But trust, once a fragile ember, now glowed like a quiet fire between them. With the saboteur taken into custody and the truth made clear to all, a calm returned to the Zalari fleet, one deeper and more profound than before. The danger had passed, but something had changed, something no tool or system could measure. In the following days, human and Zalari crews worked with a sense of unity that had not existed even during the peak of the crisis. Repairs were finished, at a steady pace with teams moving smoothly from ship to ship. Reactors were brought back online, navigation controls recalibrated, and communication systems fully restored. As the last core ship lit up its engines, a soft hum filled the emptiness of space, the sound of an empire rising again from the edge of despair. But this rebirth was different. It carried the fingerprints of another species, one the Zalari had once dismissed as inexperienced, unrefined, and too emotional to play a role in the galactic arena. Now, however, there was no denying what they had witnessed. Humanity had not only saved them from destruction, but had done so without asking for power, reward, or submission. They had shown strength through sacrifice, wisdom through patience, and leadership through humility. These were not traits the Zalari had long respected, but now they were beginning to see them as something even greater than dominance. As the Dauntless prepared for departure, a formal ceremony was arranged aboard. The Zalari flagship, a rare occurrence usually reserved for great victories or leadership transitions. The Dauntless crew stood in silence within a massive chamber of blue steel and glowing light, surrounded by hundreds of Zalari officers in ceremonial dress. Vornax Tekel stepped forward, not with the proud stride of a commander, but with a solemn grace that surprised even his own people. He held in his hands a crystalline emblem, carved with ancient symbols known only to the Zalari, the mark of guardianship. This relic was more than a medal. It was a symbol of sacred trust given only to those who had defended Zalari life without obligation. Never before had it been offered to an outsider. As he placed it into the hands of Captain Reeve, silence held the chamber like gravity. "You came to us when we were broken," Vornax said, his voice echoing across the hall. "And you restored not only our ships but our honor. We offer this not as a payment but as a bond, between your world and ours." Reeve bowed slightly, holding the mark with quiet respect. No words were needed. The gesture had spoken louder than anything he could have said. Mira stood nearby, watching with pride and wonder. Selnek Vera gave her a small nod, his eyes filled with a calm she had not seen before. The walls between their species had not just cracked, they had fallen. As the ceremony ended and handshakes were exchanged between crews that only days ago had eyed each other with suspicion, a quiet understanding passed between them. Something had begun here that would not end with the return to Earth. The Dauntless departed with new data, new memories, and a crew forever changed by what they had experienced. No great headlines greeted them upon arrival, no parades or flashing lights. But in the hidden corners of Earth's diplomatic chambers, signals began to travel faster than ever. Ambassadors prepared their speeches, envoys arranged new meetings, and suddenly, doors once closed were now opening across the stars. The Zalari sent envoys of their own, offering shared technology, cultural exchange, and a desire to understand humanity's past, their philosophies, and their strange strength of heart. Other species, once watching from afar, began to take notice. Who were these humans who had walked into a galactic silence and returned with respect from one of its oldest empires? The question echoed across countless systems, and answers followed, in the form of whispered legends of engineers who stood in the face of danger, of a young officer who bridged a language gap with nothing but trust, of a captain who chose peace over pride. Earth had not claimed territory, nor declared dominance, but had gained something far more powerful: recognition. In the weeks that followed, the Dauntless remained docked at a high-orbit station above Earth, while its crew quietly resumed their duties. But they carried themselves differently now, not with arrogance but with a kind of calm strength. They had stood in the void, seen fear in the eyes of an empire, and answered it not with fire, but with light. Mira often walked the observation deck looking up at the stars beyond Earth's atmosphere, and wondered how many more stories had yet to be written. How many chances for hope still drifted among those distant lights. Humanity, once seen as a newcomer to the stars, had stepped into its place not as a conqueror, but as something else entirely. A force for unity. A reminder that greatness does not always roar, it sometimes whispers. And in the silent places between galaxies, that whisper had finally been heard.